Well, it's Labor Day weekend, and some of you are retired in this room, right? But you still labor, right? You do volunteer work. Oh, yeah, okay, they find work for you to do out there, right? Some of you do volunteer work. Some of us labor at school and our school work. There are many ways that we work. A lot of this sermon today is going to be about vocation, though, and work. And my parents, I think about my parents and the work that they did. My dad worked in an energy producing plant where they took coal and turned it into energy. And he did that for 30-something years until he retired. One job in one place the whole time. My mother worked for a bank. She started off as a teller and then worked her way up till she was the manager of the branch of her bank. And she did that same job too for about 30 years. That's how maybe some of your work was, but these days it seems like job changeover is very common. I've worked different jobs, different places, and perhaps that's your experience as well. But I thought I would ask this question. You don't have to answer it if you don't want to, but think in your mind. What is the worst job that you have ever had? What's the worst job? Or what's the worst season that you've ever had in the job that you had? Maybe it was the worst job, if you're thinking about it, because of the task that you were asked to do. There's a program that used to be on television called Dirty Jobs with Mike Rowe. Do you watch this on Discovery Channel? I loved this show. It was on for 8 seasons, and he must have covered several hundred jobs. The worst jobs, I guess, that are jobs you take for granted. These are things that have to be done in this world, but they're messy and dirty and they're difficult. And the beauty of this show is that Mike would work alongside of the people doing these dirty jobs, and you would learn a lot about how things work. Some of the tasks that are out there were difficult, and these are just a few. One was sewer inspector. Yeah, it sounds about as yucky as you think. Right. In this episode, Mike was following sewer inspectors in San Francisco, and you know all the streets in San Francisco run down, and so this is kind of a messy job. Another messy job is a renderer. I won't talk about it too much, but that's what they do with the animals after they've used all the parts that they can, and there are more parts to use, make leather. It's messy. Let's put it that way. Everybody's making a face. I'll stop there. Another messy job is bridge painter. Okay, we have our Golden Gate Bridge, very big bridge, but a bigger bridge than that is the Mackinac Bridge. And that is in Michigan, right? But it's somebody's job. It's such a big bridge that they're constantly having to repaint parts of the bridge. So somebody's job is to just continually, every day, wake up and be part of painting that bridge. Messy jobs. Sometimes worst jobs are because of the tasks that we have to do. But maybe it wasn't the task that made your job the worst job. Maybe it was the people that you worked with, right? If you work a full-time job, that's 40, 50 hours a week that you're with the same people. They're like a second family sometimes, or even if you're working 20 hours a week. And it's kind of like a family in that you don't choose your coworkers often. And so you might be stuck with their idiosyncrasies, whether it's coming in late or calling off on busy days or gossiping or whatnot. Maybe your job was the worst job because of the people that you worked with. Maybe your job was the worst job because of a supervisor or a boss. That can make all the difference, right? The personality of a boss can change the whole experience. But maybe your job was the worst because of the hours that you worked, the commute that you had, maybe you were underpaid, or maybe the job just wasn't appreciated. Or maybe your job was the worst job because of other circumstances that were going on in your life. Maybe there was a lack of childcare. Maybe the hours, again, were really difficult. Maybe you were working more than one job. Maybe you were going to school at the same time. Maybe that's what made it the worst job. Maybe you're thinking the worst job is the one you have right now. I don't know. Well, this story that comes from Exodus, and I won't read all of it because it's 8 chapters and that's kind of long, but this is a story about people who you might agree have a worse job, a pretty bad job. I will read part of it starting in chapter 5 of Exodus. Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go so that they may celebrate a festival to me in the wilderness." But Pharaoh said, "Who is the Lord that I should heed him and let Israel go? I don't know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go." And they said, "The God of the Hebrews has revealed himself to us. Let us go a 3 days' journey into the wilderness to sacrifice to the Lord our God, or he will fall upon us with pestilence or sword." But the king of Egypt said to them, "Moses and Aaron, why are you taking the people away from their work? Get to your labors." Pharaoh continued, "Now they are more numerous than the people of the land, and yet you want them to stop working?" That same day, Pharaoh commanded the taskmasters of the people, as well as their supervisors, "You shall no longer give the people straw to make bricks as before. Let them go and gather the straw for themselves. But you shall require of them the same quantity of bricks as they have made previously. Do not diminish it, for they are lazy. And that is why they cry, 'Let us go and offer sacrifice to our God.' Let heavier work be laid on them, and then they will labor at it, and pay no attention to deceptive words." God give us understanding. This chapter, as told in Exodus. So that's a pretty bad job, right? And from this, the taskmasters and the supervisors, they go and tell this to the people. And can you imagine hearing that? You're already working so hard, and now you have the extra burden of having to gather this other material and keep up your same production rate. Find your own straw. Well, it didn't work out, of course. They fell behind in their work, and the supervisors, who were probably also Hebrews, they were beaten by the taskmasters. And they said, "Why are you treating us like this?" And Pharaoh responded again, "Because they're lazy, because they're lazy." So Moses and Aaron turned to God, and God says that he will deliver the people into the promised land. So it's bad, right? It's worse than you can see in this story, bad working conditions, right? The worst boss ever and Pharaoh, the worst supervisors, bad hours. It's a bad health plan. You just work till you drop over. And it's the worst retirement plan. Again, you work till you're dead, until you're done. And it's the worst pay because they're slaves. So into these terrible working conditions that are so bad, there's the intervention, right? And the story continues that basically they are given this permission to go on strike, okay? God sends in these plagues, and finally Pharaoh has to say, "Yes, I will let the people go." They go off on their journey, and God goes before them in a pillar of a cloud, right? But then Pharaoh says, "Wait a minute, who's going to do the building?" And he changes his mind and sends the taskmasters rolling after the Hebrews. Well, you probably know the story. The cloud, God's presence, comes between the Hebrews and the Egyptians, and the sea opens up. The Hebrews pass safely, and the taskmasters are destroyed. It's a strike. Well, mostly the sermon is this. It's about observations in our current conditions of labor and how this story seems so obviously terrible. And yet, in our practices, sometimes, again, terrible wages, terrible conditions, terrible structures still prevail. And I don't know what the answers are to that, but we have to ask ourselves as Christians, where's God in the midst of it? Where's God's presence with workers today? And where's God's presence with us as we as the church walk alongside people in their work and also are a voice for justice when we see these unfair conditions? I take part of this message from a Reverend Diane O'Connell, who's a Presbyterian minister, but has an interesting vocation in that she's a minister, but she also did work for labor negotiations. So she's the one who brought this text up as a point to talk about that. So I owe her that thanks for that. Here's the history of Labor Day. Do you know the history of Labor Day? It actually came out of terrible, unfair conditions, as it turns out. It came out during a time in the late 1800s where there was, a lot of industry and there was a strike. It was called the Pullman Strike. Have you heard of this? Well, it was a strike during the summer of 1894, and it pitted the American Railway Company against the government, is what it did. Many of the people who worked for this railroad company lived in a company town. Again, these are all terms that are gone by now, but at the time, the idea of a company town was supposed to help the workers. If you lived in a company town, the company was the one who built the church. The company was the one who owned the grocery store and set the prices for that grocery store. The company was the one who owned your house, and you paid rent to them. So basically, it was an entire community that was built around the company and was run by the company. Well, at this time, there were terrible economic conditions. It was affecting everything, and it was affecting the railroads. So in response, this Pullman company decided to lower the wages for its workers, but have them continue, again, to do the same amount of work. Not only that, but because the company owned all the houses in the town, they did not lower the rents at all, or lower the prices in the grocery stores and so forth, and the goods and services. So people were getting paid less, but having to do more and give more and pay more. Well, of course, this didn't sit well with the people for very long. Organizers came in, they tried to organize, there wasn't a labor union at the time, and so a company came in, tried to organize the people. There was a strike and there was a boycott, and the whole country felt it as all the transportation was shut down for a time. It affected 250,000 workers in 27 states. Of course, there was a lot of, struggle in this. Riots were had, people were killed, and $80 million in damages were done. The army came in, and there was this sort of standoff. In the midst of this, cut the story short, there was a resolution to this situation with the workers. And do you know that 6 days after this resolution, that's when Grover Cleveland, who was the president at the time, signed into effect this new holiday called Labor Day. It was meant, I suppose, to be sort of a thank you to workers, a recognition of workers, a consolation to workers. I don't know, but that's why we have Labor Day, right? And yet, we still, even in this time, maybe not quite those conditions, but we still have unfair practices in our workplace. There are a couple of news stories. These are, again, just observations about labor that came about. These were actually last year, and maybe you heard of them. They were stories that went around the internet. One had to do with a very popular fast food chain that I won't mention. But the fast food chain did a video, sort of a promotional video for its own workers. And in the video were tips on how to live on such low wages, which sounds really strange, doesn't it? And here were some of the tips in the video. This is no joke. Stop complaining about your job, says it reduces stress. Chew gum to reduce stress and get lower blood pressure. Break your food into small pieces so it will take longer to eat and you'll feel more full. Sell some of your unwanted possessions on eBay or Craigslist to get a little bit of extra cash. And then, in this same site, was some practical advice on how to apply for food stamps and how to put together a budget. However, in the budget that was proposed in the video, it did not include food or heat or clothing. True story. Another story that was out had to do with a big retail chain, which again, I won't mention, that had a food drive for its own employees. And also, again, provided some information on food stamps and public assistance. All this to say, yes, even in this time, we do struggle with fairness for our workers. So where's the church in all of this? I go back to our key verse. It was one we used this morning too, serendipity sometimes. What do you do when there are differences in general, differences between people, differences between economics, differences between status? You go back to love your neighbor as yourself. Love your neighbor, right? What's the loving way to deal with this? Again, Diane O'Connell, who again proposed this text for this sermon, she has this unique position of being a labor negotiator. And when you're in labor negotiations, apparently, you strive for a win-win situation. Maybe you've heard of this in your own work. Not one party wins or the other, but how can both parties come to the table and feel like they have gotten something they want? Well, loving your neighbor isn't just that feeling inside that feels all mushy, isn't it? Sometimes loving your neighbor means standing beside them, right? Or standing with them, or being a voice with them sometimes. Sometimes it means this, trying to see things from another person's point of view. Again, what would it be like? What would it be like to have to work and yet be underemployed all the time? What would it be like? And how can we relate to that? I think about this Labor Day, and I don't have a lot more to say, except that on Labor Day, interestingly enough, a lot of people in lower wage jobs in retail and fast food and so forth are actually working the most on that day, right? Right? That's where all the sales are. That's when we're all going to be out. And that's not to make anybody feel bad. I live in the United States. It's part of our economy. I understand that. But I think about this. What does it mean if you're out shopping that day or so forth? Showing somebody some love, like through your words or through your actions, showing people gratitude for the work that they do, I think is part of celebrating, right? Celebrating Labor Day. People come with all kinds of circumstances. Again, it's a different world where people have to work multiple jobs, where people's hours are so often, they struggle with healthcare. There's so many factors these days. And again, I think as the church, we have a role in supporting the work that people do, of showing gratitude for it. And in those cases where there is an injustice, standing up and having a voice. Amen. Amen.